Ronan Thatcher could have called any number in his phone and had a car, a driver, or a courier arranged within the hour. He was that kind of man, the kind whose problems were routinely solved by other people, quickly, without fuss. Standing on the shoulder of a rural highway outside Pictou, Nova Scotia, with a dead engine and zero signal, he reached for his phone anyway. Old habit. No bars, not even one. He set the phone on the roof of the rental car and looked out at the road. The trees had gone full amber and red. There was no sound except wind off the water and the occasional crow repositioning somewhere in the maples. He had flown into Halifax that morning for his mentor's funeral, driven 2 hours northwest because he'd needed the silence, and now here he was, stranded, underdressed for the October cold, still wearing the tie he'd knotted at 6 a.m. As though a proper Windsor might hold something together that nothing else was managing to hold. The shaking in his hands had started at the graveside. It hadn't stopped. He walked. 40 minutes later, Ronan found the edge of a town, a main street barely 3 blocks long, a hardware store, a post office, a church with a hand-painted notice board, and at the far end, a low building with fogged windows and a sign that read, in careful hand lettering, Doyle's. The D was slightly larger than the rest, as though it had been added by someone who felt the name deserved proper emphasis. A bell chimed when he pushed the door open. The diner smelled of biscuits and wood smoke. 4 tables, mismatched chairs, a counter with 6 stools. A woman stood behind it, wiping the surface with the particular economy of someone who has wiped the same counter 10,000 times and still takes the work seriously. She looked up. She was in her mid-60s, gray hair pinned, a flannel shirt under a clean apron. She took in Ronan, the city coat, the funeral tie, the mud from the ditch on his dress shoes, and said nothing for a moment. "Sit wherever you like," she said. "I'll bring menus." "I don't need a menu," he said. "My car broke down on the 104. I was hoping to use a phone." She pointed to a landline near the kitchen door. "Help yourself." He called the rental company, then a tow service out of New Glasgow. 45 minutes, the dispatcher said. Maybe an hour. He hung up and stood there, looking at the room. One whole wall was covered in a corkboard, dozens of slips of paper pinned across it, handwritten, layered in places. He couldn't read them from across the room. "Sit," the woman said again. "No sense standing in your good coat." He sat at the counter. She poured him coffee without asking and set a small ceramic jug of cream alongside. He wrapped both hands around the mug. The shaking, he noticed, had slowed some between the ditch and the door. "You've come from a funeral," she said. Again, not a question. He looked up. "How'd you know?" She nodded at his lapel. "White lily petal, and you've got that face." He reached up and found it, small, dried, caught in the wool weave. He didn't remove it. "My business partner," he said. "My mentor, Graham." He paused. He hadn't said the name out loud since the graveside. It landed differently out of context, heavier, somehow more real. He passed on Monday. "I'm sorry," she said. The way she said it, without hurry, made him believe it. She brought him a bowl of soup he hadn't ordered. He ate it. He drank 2 cups of coffee. When the tow truck finally appeared and he came back in to settle up, she handed him a handwritten bill, $12.50. He reached for his wallet and remembered he hadn't stopped at an ATM since Vancouver. He pulled out his card, matte black, the kind that carries no limit because a limit had never been necessary. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't have cash on me. I can put it on the card, or I can send something when I'm back in Halifax tonight. Whatever you prefer." She looked at the card. She looked at him. "I don't take cards," she said, "and I don't take promises from strangers." He almost smiled despite everything. "Then I'm afraid I owe you a meal." "You do," she said. She picked up the bill, turned it over, and wrote something on the back with a short pencil from her apron. She handed it across the counter. He read it. "Balance owing. Come back and tell me how it ends." He looked up. "I'm sorry?" "You've been sitting at my counter for 90 minutes, she said. "You told me your partner's name and then you stopped. That's not a finished story. I'll call the meal paid when you come back and give me the rest of it." Ronan stood there with the slip of paper. In 20 years of business, in conference rooms and boardrooms and back-channel conversations with people who wanted things from him, no one had ever asked for anything like this. Money, introductions, his time, his opinion. Yes, regularly, constantly. An ending to a story he hadn't yet told, never once. "I don't know how it ends," he said. Honestly, for probably the first time all week. Then come back when you do. She turned back to the counter. Drive safe, mister. Thatcher, he said. Ronan Thatcher. She nodded once. Winnie Doyle. He drove back to Halifax behind the tow truck, with the handwritten bill folded in his breast pocket, vaguely unsettled by the sensation of having been given homework. He did not go back that week or the next. He returned to Vancouver, the board meeting, the Q3 review, a conference in Calgary. His assistant noted, with tactful restraint, that he had taken to standing at his office window more than usual. He wasn't aware of it until she mentioned it. He apologized and moved back to his desk. The bill from Winnie's had migrated from his breast pocket to the inside pocket of his jacket, and then, without his entirely noticing, into his wallet behind his health card. He found it there one evening while looking for a receipt to submit for expenses. He unfolded it, read the back, refolded it. He did not throw it away. 3 weeks after the funeral, a development meeting brought him to Halifax. He cleared Thursday afternoon on the pretext of a client visit and drove the 170 kilometers to Pictou without telling anyone where he was going. He told himself it was closure. He told himself it was simply to settle $12.50. The bell chimed. 2 elderly men were playing cribbage at the corner table. A young woman with a sleeping toddler in a carrier was eating a sandwich by the window. Winnie Doyle was behind the counter with a crossword book and a stubby pen. And she looked up with the expression of someone who is unsurprised by things they have nonetheless been quietly expecting. You came back, she said. I owe you $12.50, Ronan said, setting a 20 on the counter. I told you how the debt works. She didn't touch the 20. Sit down. He sat. She poured his coffee, sat on the stool at the far end of the counter, not directly across from him, but nearby, the way someone positions themselves when they are genuinely willing to listen but not performing the gesture of it. Tell me about Graham, she said. He talked for nearly 2 hours. Not the polished version, not the one he'd given at the lectern where Graham was visionary, principled, all the things that are true of people, but only the parts sayable in a church. He told Winnie about the arguments, the long silences during the years the company grew fast enough that they'd both gotten lost in it. He told her about a Friday afternoon 3 months before Graham died, when Graham had phoned him just to talk, not about work, just to talk, and Ronan had said he was in a meeting and would call back, and then the week had gotten away from him and he hadn't. He'd been carrying that Friday for 11 weeks. Winnie didn't tell him it wasn't his fault. She didn't say Graham would have understood. She said, that sounds like something that'll sit with you for a while, and somehow that was better than either of the other things. When he finally ran out of words, she refilled his mug and led him, with a small gesture, to the corkboard on the far wall. Up close, the slips of paper were covered in different handwriting, pen and pencil, neat and hurried, printed and cursive. Got the job in Moncton, moving next week. Christine, 2019. Baby came early, but she's perfect. Thank you for the tea that night. Dad's doing better. 6-month BK, March 2021. Still here, not sure if that's news or not. Thought you'd want to know. P. The room was quiet except for the low murmur of the cribbage players and the wind off the harbor. Henry started this, Winnie said, standing beside him. My husband. He said a diner feeds people once. A story feeds them longer. She pointed to the lower right corner of the board where one slip of paper was pinned apart from the others, slightly yellowed. The handwriting was different, older, more deliberate. If they don't come back to finish it, keep their name up anyway. Maybe they just need more time. Ronan read it twice. When did he write that? He asked. Last year he was well enough too, she said, 2014. He stood looking at the board, all those names, all those small updates, each one a thread someone had returned to tie off. How many people come back? Most, eventually. She moved toward the kitchen doorway. Henry always said the point was never the ending. The point was making sure the door stayed open. Ronan looked at the slip with Henry's handwriting for another long moment. Then he said, quietly, I've never told anyone that story. The Friday call. I know, she said. How do you know? Because you told it like it was the first time. She disappeared into the kitchen. A moment later, her voice came back through the pass-through. Same time next week? He opened his mouth to explain about the board call, the Vancouver schedule, the Toronto flight. He had a full week with not a single spare afternoon penciled in. Same time next week, he said. He came back 7 times over the following 2 months. He began noticing details he'd missed in the first visit. The small vases of dried flowers on each table. In November it was goldenrod and heather from Winnie's backyard. The rack near the door where regulars left their own mugs, labeled in masking tape. A shelf of paperbacks in varying states of repair with a hand-lettered card, "Take one, leave one, or borrow, no record kept." He noticed that Winnie never once asked what he did for work. He was so accustomed to that being the first question that its absence took several visits to register. When he finally brought it up himself, CEO, Logistics 2,000 employees across the country, she said, the way someone marks a piece of information without awarding it special weight. Then she asked if he wanted a scone. He started to relax in a way he hadn't in years, not the effortful relaxation of a scheduled retreat or a long weekend somewhere carefully chosen. Something quieter, a small, reliable stillness that appeared at Winnie's counter and had begun, to his own mild surprise, appearing elsewhere too. He stopped checking his phone during meetings. He called his brother on a Tuesday for no particular reason. His assistant noted he'd stopped requesting weekend briefing documents and seemed, in her word, settled. He thought about what to call it. He decided settled was probably accurate. In early December, the board circulated a deal summary for a major acquisition. A competing firm, regional Nova Scotia-based, solid margins, one main processing facility outside Pictou. Ronan read the summary on the flight from Vancouver to Halifax. He read it again in his hotel room. He read it a third time with the lamp on and the harbor dark outside. The deal made sense. Every number confirmed it. The combined company would lead its segment east of Ontario. The Pictou plant would be restructured, centralized operations moving to Halifax or Montreal, floor positions reducing significantly. Conservative estimate, 160 to 180 jobs. His board chair wanted a decision by Friday. He drove to Pictou the next morning. The diner was quiet. Winnie was cutting pie at the counter. She said nothing, just filled his mug and set the cream alongside. He sat for a long time without speaking. He watched a man in work boots come in, nod at Ronan, eat his pie at the far stool, leave exact change in the dish beside the register, and nod again on the way out. 2 women in scrubs came for takeaway containers. A teenager collected something from the shelf under the counter and left money in a tin without any transaction being spoken aloud. This, Ronan thought, was what 160 jobs looked like from the other end. Not a line item in a deal summary. Not a human capital reduction metric. Something like this, the particular texture of a town where people had particular habits and particular roots and particular things they did every day that were quietly woven into a place. "You've got something sitting on you today," Winnie said, refilling his mug. "Board decision," he said, "large one." "When do you need to decide?" "Friday." She said nothing else. She went back to the kitchen. Ronan sat. The light outside the steamed windows shifted as clouds moved off the water. Winnie came back and wiped down the section of counter beside him. "Henry had an offer in 2011, she said without preamble. "Developer from Halifax, good money. Not extraordinary, but enough. He'd have been able to retire comfortably." Ronan looked at her. He turned it down. I asked him why after. She folded the cloth. He said, "Some buildings are just buildings. But I've seen people come through that door on the worst night of their life and leave able to breathe again. I don't know how to put a figure on that, so I won't." She went back to the kitchen. Ronan sat there until the color of the light outside changed completely. He did not return to Pictou for 6 weeks. He told himself it was the season. Year-end close, board demands, a difficult personnel situation in the Toronto office. All of that was true. None of it was the reason. The reason was simpler and harder to say. He had voted against the acquisition, and he didn't know how to explain to Winnie why, because explaining it would mean admitting that a corkboard of handwritten notes and a dead man's philosophy had quietly shifted what he considered sound judgment, and he wasn't entirely sure that was professional information to disclose. In January, his assistant found the handwritten diner bill while clearing out his old wallet. She photographed it to log the expense, $12.50, Doyle's October, and sent him the photo with a message, unsure of category. Description on the back doesn't match any standard expense code. He looked at his phone for a long moment. The photo, the receipt, his own neat handwriting on the front from when she'd added the date, Winnie's handwriting on the back. Balance owing. Come back and tell me how it ends." He booked a flight to Halifax for Thursday. The bell chimed. The diner was warm and unhurried. Two women he didn't recognize were sharing tea at the window table. Winnie was behind the counter, and when she looked up and saw him, her expression didn't change much, but something in it shifted the way a door shifts when the latch releases. Slight, but unmistakably in the direction of open. "You've been gone a while," she said. "I know," he sat at the counter. "I owe you something." "You do." "The ending," he said, "or the part of it that's finished." She filled his mug and came around to sit on the stool at the far end. "Ready." He told her about the acquisition, about the numbers that supported it, about standing in the boardroom in Vancouver explaining to 6 reasonable people why he was recommending against a deal that every model endorsed. He told her about the 2 weeks of recalibration, the alternate strategy, the slower growth path, the different approach that left the PIC2 facility intact. He told her that 172 people currently employed at that plant had no idea a vote had been cast that directly concerned them, because there was nothing to announce, no drama, just a line removed from a board resolution and replaced with another. Winnie listened without interrupting. "I don't know if it was the right business decision," he said. "Purely on the numbers, I'm still not certain." "What standard are you using then?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. "Henry's," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stood, crossed to the corkboard, took a blank slip from the small stack pinned at the corner, and wrote on it. She pressed it to the board and stepped back. He read it from the counter. Ronan Thatcher came back, finished the story. January 2024. He looked at it for a long time. "Does that settle the debt?" he asked. Winnie went to the register and opened the small drawer beneath it. She took out a stamp, old, wooden-handled, the kind that requires an ink pad. She pressed it down deliberately, and then set it firmly against the handwritten bill he'd placed on the counter. He looked down at it. Paid in full, red ink slightly uneven, entirely official. "It does," she said. He sat with that for a moment. He should have felt it as a conclusion. He didn't. "Same time next week?" he asked. The corner of her mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile and entirely was. "I'll put the kettle on." By spring, Doyle's had a small wooden table near the window. 2 chairs, afternoon light landing across it at a particular angle that Ronan had once mentioned, in passing, was exceptionally good for reading. A hand-lettered card on the table said, "Reserved for long conversations. Walk-ins welcome." He'd quietly established a small fund through his company's charitable arm. No press release, no announcement, providing pro bono marketing support and digital consultation to small businesses in rural Nova Scotia. Doyle's was not on the list. He hadn't asked. Some things he'd decided you kept in their right category. He came back every few weeks, sometimes from Vancouver, sometimes from Halifax when work brought him east. He always sat at the counter first, had his coffee, and then, if the afternoon stretched far enough, moved to the window table. The corkboard kept filling. He added his own note in April, on a slip torn from the corner of a notebook. He pinned it himself, below the one Winnie had written in January. "Still figuring out how it ends, back next week." One evening in late May, he arrived to find Winnie pressing a new slip to the board. He read it over her shoulder. "Henry, the door's still open. You were right about everything." He said nothing. She didn't explain. They sat at the counter and drank their tea and watched the light change over the harbor, and neither of them was in any hurry to be anywhere else. The bill from October was still in his wallet. The red paid in full covered the bottom half now. But she had written something else on it too, small in the margin, a detail he'd only caught on his 4th or 5th reading. Next visit, same as always. He'd asked her once what that meant. She'd looked at him as though it were the simplest thing in the world. "It means come back," she said. He had not needed reminding since. Some debts were never really about what was owed. Ronan Thatcher had spent 2 decades measuring value in columns and quarters and the clean logic of returns. It took a handwritten slip of paper in PIC2, Nova Scotia, to show him the accounts that actually mattered were never written down anywhere. They were kept in corkboards, in shared meals, in the willingness to sit with someone long enough that they could finally finish saying what they meant. Henry Doyle had understood something that most people learn too late, if they learn it at all, that the most important thing you can offer someone who is struggling is not a solution, but a door that stays open. Not pity, not charity, just a reason to come back. Perhaps that is what quiet kindness actually looks like. Not the grand gesture, but the small, repeated one. Not fixing what is broken, but making sure the person who is broken always has somewhere to go when they are ready to be honest about it. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. Has anyone ever asked you for something unexpected? Not money, not a favor, but something simple and strange that turned out to mean far more than you understood at the time. Tell us in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, we hope you'll stay with us. Subscribe to Deep Stirring Stories, where every week we sit down with a kind of moment that doesn't make the news but quietly changes everything.